The most dangerous snipers are not the ones with the steadiest hands. They're the ones who have already lost everything and discovered they still have something worth killing for. Master Chief Petty Officer Soraya Nazari had learned this truth 4 years ago in a Yemen valley, watching through her scope as the world ended. Now she stood on a sun-bleached rifle range at Naval Special Warfare Training Center Coronado, watching a young woman fail for the 37th time. The other instructors had stopped counting. They had stopped caring 3 weeks ago when Seaman Apprentice Lucia Reyes missed her qualification by 4 points. Washout, they muttered when they thought Soraya could not hear. Waste of a training slot. But Soraya had been watching Reyes for those same 3 weeks, and she saw something the others had decided not to look for. Reyes lay prone on the firing line, her breathing too fast, her shoulders climbing toward her ears with every exhale. The 13 Malawian Quatch's rifle looked enormous against her small frame. Downrange, the target waited at 800 meters, indifferent to her struggle. "She's anticipating the recoil," Soraya said, walking up behind her. Her voice carried no judgment, only observation. "You are fighting the rifle instead of letting it work." Reyes flinched at the sound. She had not heard Soraya approach. Nobody ever did. "Master Chief, I have tried everything." The frustration in her voice was thick enough to taste. "I have adjusted my grip, my cheek weld, my breathing. Nothing works." Soraya knelt beside her, close enough to see the tremor in the young woman's hands. That tremor told a story. Not weakness. Fear. The fear of someone who had been told her entire life that she did not belong, and had started to believe it. Before we continue with Soraya's story, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you know someone in the military whose true abilities are constantly underestimated. "Show me your natural point of aim," Soraya said. Reyes adjusted, settling behind the scope. Her body was a knot of tension, muscle fighting muscle. Soraya reached out and placed 2 fingers on the back of Reyes's firing hand. Not pushing, just resting there. "You are gripping with your whole hand. Your trigger finger should be independent. Relax everything except the pad of your index finger." The change was subtle, a softening in the wrist, a release of pressure across the knuckles. "Now breathe." Not the combat breathing they taught you. Just breathe like you're falling asleep. Reyes inhaled slowly. The crosshairs drifted across the target, then settled. "When you are ready," Soraya said. "Not when you think I want you to shoot. When your body tells you the shot is there." 3 seconds passed. 5. The other instructors on the range had stopped their own work to watch. Senior Chief Dominic Harlan stood with his arms crossed, skepticism written across his weathered face. He had been running this range for 11 years and had never seen Soraya take personal interest in a struggling candidate. The rifle cracked. Downrange, the spotter called the hit. Center mass. First clean shot Reyes had made in 3 weeks. Reyes exhaled sharply, something between a laugh and a sob. Her hands were shaking worse than before, but now it was release rather than fear. "Again," Soraya said. Reyes fired. Another hit, then another. By the 5th round, the tremor was gone entirely. Harlan walked over, his boots crunching on the gravel. He looked at the target, then at Soraya, then at Reyes. His expression shifted from skepticism to something more complicated. "Instructor Nazari," he said, using her teaching title rather than her rank. A small slight she had learned to ignore. "How did you know?" Soraya stood, brushing dust from her knees. She was already losing interest in the conversation. "Know what, Senior Chief? That she could make those shots." Soraya looked at Reyes, who was still staring downrange at her target, as if it might disappear. "I did not know she could. I knew she was being taught wrong. There is a difference." She walked away before Harlan could respond. She had learned years ago that explaining herself to men who did not want to understand was a waste of breath better spent on trigger control. The morning sun was climbing toward its brutal peak when the black SUV pulled into the range parking area. Soraya noticed it immediately. She noticed everything. The vehicle was government, but not standard Navy motor pool. The windows were tinted beyond regulation darkness. The driver did not exit. The passenger door opened, and Commander Diane Hollister stepped out. Soraya felt something cold move through her chest. Hollister ran Naval Special Warfare Group 1. She did not visit training ranges. She did not leave her operations center for anything less than a crisis or an opportunity. Often they were the same thing. Master Chief Nazari, Hollister said as she approached. No greeting. No small talk. Hollister had never been one for either. I need 30 minutes of your time. Soraya gestured toward the range behind her. I have candidates qualifying this afternoon. Harlan can cover. Hollister's tone made it clear this was not a request. This is not a conversation for open air. They walked toward the command building, past rows of candidates doing physical training in the sand, past the grinder where so many dreams came to die. Soraya had seen thousands of young men and women pass through this place. She had watched them break and rebuild and break again. Some of them became SEALs. Most did not. All of them were changed. Hollister led her to a secure briefing room and closed the door. The air conditioning was aggressive, a sharp contrast to the heat outside. Soraya remained standing while Hollister sat. You know I would not pull you from training without good reason, Hollister said. She slid a folder across the table. Red border. Classified marking Soraya had not seen since her last operational deployment. I am an instructor now, Soraya said. Her voice was flat. Whatever this is, I am not the right choice. Open the folder. Soraya did not move. Her hand drifted unconsciously to the dog tags beneath her shirt, where 2 rings hung on the chain beside her identification. One was hers. One had belonged to someone who would never wear it again. Hollister watched the gesture. I know what I'm asking, Soraya. I know what it costs. But I need you to open that folder. For a long moment, Soraya simply stood there. Then she reached out, flipped open the cover, and looked at the photograph clipped to the first page. Her face went pale. The cold in her chest became ice, spreading through her limbs until she could feel her heartbeat in her teeth. She knew that face. She had seen it through a rifle scope 4 years ago in the moments after her husband stopped breathing. She had watched that face give the order. She had watched it smile. For the first time in 4 years, she was looking at the man responsible for the worst night of her life. The name beneath the photograph was Kareem Bashar, warlord, insurgent commander, butcher of American servicemen. Soraya had spent 4 years learning everything intelligence could tell her about him, and 4 years trying to forget the 11 seconds she had watched him through her scope. Hollister let the silence stretch. She understood what she was asking. That was the worst part. She understood, and she was asking anyway. He has resurfaced, Hollister said. Eastern Afghanistan. Hindu Kush region. We have an asset inside his operation who is ready to come out, but Bashar has tripled his security. 3 extraction attempts by other teams have failed. 2 of those teams did not come home. Soraya closed the folder. Her hands were steady. They had not trembled since Yemen, not even once. She had burned that weakness out of herself in the months after Darius died, alone in their apartment, dry firing at a spot on the wall until her fingers bled and her mind went quiet. Why me, she said. It was not really a question. Because you are the best long-range precision shooter Naval Special Warfare has ever produced. Because the terrain requires overwatch capability beyond what any active operator can provide. Because the weather window is narrow and the margin for error is 0. Hollister paused. And because I know you have been tracking him. I know you have a file on him that rivals anything we have in official channels. I know you have been waiting for this. Soraya said nothing. There was nothing to say. Hollister was right about all of it. SEAL Team 3 is deploying in 48 hours, Hollister continued. Lieutenant Commander Ashworth is running the operation. You will be attached as technical advisor with full operational authority for Overwatch positioning. Ashworth. Soraya knew the name, knew the reputation, old money and older grudges. A man who had spent his career collecting achievements like medals and treating anyone who threatened his narrative as an enemy. She had heard he believed women in special operations were a political experiment that would eventually fail. She had heard a lot of things about Preston Ashworth. He will not want me there, Soraya said. No, he will not. Hollister stood and walked to the window, looking out at the candidates struggling through their training. But I am not asking his permission, and I am not asking yours. I am telling you that this is happening because you're the only person who can make it work. The only question is whether you go as a willing participant or as a reluctant one. Soraya touched the rings beneath her shirt again. Darius had given her his wedding band the morning of the Yemen operation. For luck, he had said, grinning that crooked grin she had fallen in love with during their first deployment together. She had been wearing it when they told her he was gone. She had not taken it off since. I will need to see the full intelligence package, she said. Terrain analysis, weather projections, enemy disposition estimates. Everything. Hollister turned back to face her. A slight smile crossed her features, there and gone. You will have it within the hour. The briefing room at NSW Group 1 was standing room only when Soraya arrived the next morning. She recognized most of the faces from reputation, if not personal acquaintance. SEAL Team 3 had built its legend on a dozen deployments across 3 theaters of operation. These are serious men who had done serious work in serious places. At the front of the room, Lieutenant Commander Preston Ashworth held court. He was tall and angular, with the kind of bone structure that photographed well and the kind of confidence that came from never having been told no. When Soraya entered, his eyes tracked to her, and something flickered across his expression. Displeasure carefully controlled. Gentlemen, he said, not adjusting his address to include her. We have a late addition to our operational roster. Master Chief Nazari will be serving as technical advisor for this deployment. She brings considerable experience in long-range precision operations. The words were correct. The tone made them an insult. From the second row, a familiar face caught Soraya's attention. Senior Chief Elias Okonkwo had been one of her students 8 years ago, back when she was still running the sniper school curriculum. He had been talented and hungry and smart enough to listen. Now he wore the anchors of a senior enlisted leader, and when their eyes met, he nodded once. A small gesture of respect that said more than Ashworth's entire introduction. Soraya took a seat in the back row. She had learned long ago that the best position in any room was the one that let you see everyone else without being seen yourself. Ashworth continued the briefing. The operation was straightforward on paper. Insert via helicopter to a remote landing zone. Move 12 kilometers through mountain terrain. Reach the compound where the asset was being held. Extract the asset. And eliminate Bashar if the opportunity presented itself. 48 hours on the ground, maximum. Soraya listened and said nothing. She noted the gaps in his planning, the assumptions he was making about enemy capability, the overconfidence in his timeline. She noted the way he glossed over the weather reports, showing a major storm system building in the region. She noted everything. After the briefing, Okonkwo found her in the corridor. Master Chief. His voice was warm in a way that surprised her. She had not realized how much she missed being spoken to by someone who actually respected her. It is good to see you. Senior Chief, you have done well for yourself. He shrugged. I had good teachers. His expression sobered. I heard about Chief Nazari. About Darius. I am sorry. He was one of the best spotters I ever worked with. Soraya felt the familiar tightness in her chest. For years, and the mention of his name still felt like a hand closing around her heart. He was the best I ever worked with, too, she said. In every way that mattered. Okonkwo glanced back toward the briefing room, where Ashworth was holding court with his inner circle. Listen, he said, lowering his voice. The lieutenant commander is not going to make this easy for you. His father washed out of BUD/S in the 80s. Blamed it on standards being lowered for diversity quotas. Preston grew up hearing that story, and he has never let it go. I'm not here to fight his father's battles, Soraya said. No, but he might try to make you fight them anyway. Okonkwo paused. Just watch your back out there. I will do what I can, but chain of command is what it is. Soraya nodded. She appreciated the warning. Even if it told her nothing she had not already suspected. She had been fighting battles like this her entire career. One more would not break her. That night, alone in her quarters, she allowed herself to look at the photograph she kept hidden in her gear bag. Darius, grinning at the camera, his arm around her shoulders during their honeymoon in Santorini. They had been so young, so certain that skill and love would be enough to keep them safe. She touched his face through the plastic sleeve. Then she set the photograph aside and began cleaning her rifle. The 13 Malawian Quachas was an old friend, its stock worn smooth by years of use, its action as familiar as her own heartbeat. Tomorrow she would fly into a war zone with men who did not want her there, hunting a ghost who had taken everything from her. The odds were not in her favor. They never had been. She racked the bolt and listened to the clean metallic sound of a round chambering. Somewhere in the Hindu Kush, Karim Bashar was sleeping peacefully, unaware that the widow of the man he had murdered was finally coming for him. Soraya intended to make sure he never slept peacefully again. The helicopter shuddered through turbulence as it crossed into Afghan airspace. Soraya sat with her back against the fuselage, her rifle case between her knees, watching the men of SEAL Team 3 conduct their final equipment checks. They moved with the easy confidence of professionals who had done this 100 times before. None of them looked at her. Ashworth sat at the front of the cabin, reviewing terrain maps on a tablet. He had not spoken to her since the briefing, communicating only through Okonkwo when operational necessity required it. It was a petty power play, the kind of thing small men did when they could not win on merit. Soraya had stopped letting such things bother her years ago. Beside her, a young operator was struggling with a Jam magazine release. His name, Tape Red Yates. Petty Officer 2nd Class Brennan Yates, according to the roster. 24 years old, 2 deployments, solid performance reviews. The newest member of the team. She reached over and took the magazine from his hands. The spring had seated incorrectly during loading, a common mistake when nerves made fingers clumsy. She cleared it with a practiced motion and handed it back. Yates stared at her for a moment, then nodded. "Thanks, Master Chief." It was the first time anyone on the team besides Okonkwo had addressed her directly. "First deployment to this region?" she asked. "Third overall. First in the Hindu Kush." Yates glanced toward the front of the cabin, where Ashworth was still focused on his maps. "They say these mountains eat helicopters for breakfast." "They do." Soraya remembered her first insertion into this terrain 15 years ago. A different war, the same mountains. The Hindu Kush did not care about politics or timelines or mission objectives. It cared only about gravity and weather and the fragility of human bodies at altitude. "Is that why you're nervous?" Yates looked surprised that she had noticed. "I'm not nervous," he said, then caught her expression and reconsidered. "Okay, maybe a little. The lieutenant commander seems confident, but some of the senior guys have been quiet. That usually means something." Soraya appreciated his honesty. Most young operators spent their first years pretending they had no doubts, as if uncertainty was a weakness rather than a survival instinct. "What do you think it means?" "I think it means they have seen enough operations go sideways to know that confidence and competence are not the same thing." He paused. "No disrespect to the lieutenant commander." "None taken," Soraya said. She glanced at Ashworth, still absorbed in his planning. "The best leaders I have known were the ones who listened more than they talked. They understood that the map is not the territory." Yates followed her gaze. "Can I ask you something, Master Chief?" "You just did." A small smile flickered across his face. "Fair point. I heard some of the guys talking. They said you hold some kind of record. Longest confirmed kill in naval special warfare history. Is that true?" Soraya considered the question. The shot he was referring to had happened in a place that did not officially exist during an operation that had never officially occurred. 2,300 meters, crosswind, moving target. She had made it because the alternative was watching 6 Americans die. "There are no official records for things that never officially happened," she said. "But I will tell you this. Distance is not what makes a shot difficult. Distance is just math. What makes a shot difficult is everything else. Fear, fatigue, the knowledge that if you miss, people die." She looked at him directly. "That is what separates the shooters from the snipers. Anyone can hit a target on a calm day at a comfortable range. The question is whether you can make the shot when nothing is calm and nothing is comfortable." The helicopter banked hard, beginning its descent toward the landing zone. Outside the windows, the mountains rose like broken teeth against the night sky. Somewhere in that darkness, Karim Bashar was waiting. He did not know she was coming. That was the only advantage she had. The insertion went smoothly. 12 operators plus Soraya hit the ground in under 90 seconds, the helicopter disappearing back into the darkness before the rotor wash had settled. They were alone now, 12 kilometers from the target compound, with 48 hours to complete the mission. Ashworth gathered the team for a final briefing, his voice low and clipped. We move in two elements. Alpha takes point, Bravo provides rear security. Nazari, you stay with Bravo. Try to keep up. Soraya said nothing. She had studied the terrain maps for 6 hours before deployment and had already identified 3 problems with Ashworth's planned route. The northern approach he had chosen would funnel them through a narrow valley with limited cover and multiple elevation points perfect for ambush. A competent enemy commander would have those positions covered. She had raised these concerns during the planning phase. Ashworth had dismissed them. The movement through the mountains was brutal. The altitude turned every step into labor, the thin air burning in their lungs. Soraya kept pace easily, her body remembering rhythms learned over 2 decades of deployments. She noticed Yates glancing back at her occasionally, as if surprised she was still there. For hours into the march, Okonkwo fell back to walk beside her. You've been watching the ridgelines, he said quietly. What do you see? Soraya kept her eyes moving as she spoke. 3 observation points we have passed in the last hour. All of them would give a spotter clear line of sight to our route. None of them showed activity, but that does not mean they were empty. You think we are being watched? I think a man who has survived 3 extraction attempts does not do so by accident. Bashar knows how we operate. He knows our insertion patterns, our movement protocols, our timing preferences. If he has any intelligence capability at all, he knows we are coming. Okonkwo was silent for a moment. I raised similar concerns with the lieutenant commander. He believes our intelligence suggests Bashar has reduced his outer security to consolidate forces at the compound. Soraya almost laughed. And you believe that? I believe Ashworth has more combat deployments than either of us. I also believe that experience can become arrogance when it stops being tested. He looked at her directly. What would you do differently? I would have inserted from the south, used the glacier field as cover, and approached the compound from the direction they least expect. It would add 6 hours to our timeline, but reduce our exposure by 80%. Then why did you not push harder in the planning phase? Because Ashworth made it clear that my role is technical advisor, not tactical commander. And because I have learned that men like him do not change their minds. They only change their excuses. The team pressed on through the darkness. Ahead, the peaks of the Hindu Kush scraped against the stars like the spine of some ancient beast. The weather reports had shown a major storm system building to the west, but Ashworth had calculated they would complete the mission before it arrived. Soraya had her doubts. The mountains made their own weather, and they did not consult military timelines before doing so. As dawn began to gray the eastern horizon, they reached their first waypoint, a shallow cave system that would provide cover for the daylight hours. They would rest here, then make the final push to the compound after nightfall. Soraya found a position at the cave mouth where she could watch the approaches. She did not sleep. She had not slept well since Yemen, and she certainly was not going to start now, 12 kilometers from the man who had murdered her husband. The storm arrived ahead of schedule. By mid-afternoon, the first flakes were falling, and the wind had begun to howl through the passes. Ashworth studied the weather with obvious frustration, then made his decision. We move tonight as planned. The storm will provide cover. Soraya watched him give the order and felt something cold settle in her stomach. He was not wrong about the cover, but he was wrong about everything else. A storm this size would ground any air support. It would cut their communications. It would turn the mountain into a killing ground where the advantage went to whoever knew the terrain best. And Kareem Bashar had been living in these mountains for 15 years. She checked her rifle one more time, running her fingers along the familiar worn stock. Whatever was waiting for them at that compound, she would face it the same way she had faced everything since Yemen. Alone, if necessary, but never unprepared. The snow was falling harder now, thick flakes that cut visibility to less than 50 meters. Soraya moved with the team through the white darkness, her senses straining against the storm. Every instinct she had developed over 2 decades of combat operations was screaming that something was wrong. The compound lay 2 kilometers ahead, a cluster of stone buildings nestled against a cliff face. According to intelligence, Bashar maintained a force of roughly 40 fighters, with the asset being held in the central structure. The plan was simple. Alpha Element would breach the main building and secure the asset, while Bravo provided perimeter security. Soraya would establish overwatch from an elevated position to the east. Simple plans had a way of becoming complicated when bullets started flying. Ashworth called a halt at the final rally point, a rocky outcropping that provided minimal shelter from the wind. The team gathered around him, their faces obscured by balaclavas and snow. Final checks, Ashworth said. We breach in 20 minutes. Nazari, your overwatch position is marked on the map. Get there and stay there until extraction. Soraya studied the position he had indicated. It was adequate but not optimal. A ridgeline 800 meters from the compound with decent sight lines but limited cover. She had identified a better position during her terrain analysis. A higher elevation point that would require an additional 30 minutes to reach, but would provide superior angles on all approaches. There's a better position at grid reference 472, she said. Higher elevation, better coverage of the northern approach. Ashworth did not look up from his equipment check. The position I assigned is sufficient. We do not have time for you to go sightseeing. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Vance, Ashworth's senior enlisted advisor, snorted quietly. The sound was not quite a laugh, but close enough to communicate his contempt. Soraya held Ashworth's gaze for a long moment. Then she nodded once and moved toward her assigned position. She had made her recommendation. Chain of command had made its decision. Now all she could do was execute and hope that Ashworth's confidence was justified. It was not. The first indication that something was wrong came 12 minutes later, when Soraya reached her overwatch position and began scanning the compound through her scope. The intelligence briefing had described a lightly fortified village with scattered security positions. What she saw instead was a killing ground. New fighting positions had been constructed along the compound perimeter, their fresh-turned earth barely visible under the accumulating snow. Additional structures had been erected between the main buildings, creating interlocking fields of fire. The guard rotation she observed suggested not 40 fighters, but closer to 60 or 70. She keyed her radio. Overwatch in position. Be advised, I am seeing significant fortification upgrades from the intelligence package. Estimate enemy strength at 60 to 70 personnel. Recommend abort and reassessment. Static crackled in her earpiece. Then Ashworth's voice, clipped and dismissive. Acknowledged. We proceed as planned. The asset confirms extraction window closes in 4 hours. We do not have time to second-guess intelligence. Soraya bit back her response. She had seen operations go wrong before, but never with such willful blindness at the command level. Ashworth was so committed to his timeline that he was ignoring evidence directly in front of him. Through her scope, she watched Alpha Element begin their approach toward the main building. They moved well, using the storm for concealment, their formations tight and professional. Whatever Ashworth's failings as a leader, his men were skilled operators who knew their craft. The first shots came without warning. Muzzle flashes erupted from 3 positions simultaneously, catching Alpha Element in a crossfire that should have been impossible. The intelligence had shown those positions as empty. Someone had been feeding false information. Contact front. Okonkwo's voice barked over the radio. Multiple shooters. We are taking effective fire. Soraya was already engaging. Her first shot dropped a fighter who had exposed himself to fire on the pin team. Her second took another in the chest as he moved between positions. But for every target she eliminated, 2 more seemed to appear. This was not a defensive position. This was a trap. The asset, she realized. The asset had been compromised. Bashar had known they were coming, known their route, known their timing. He had laid out bait and waited for them to walk into his kill zone. Through the chaos, She heard Ashworth shouting orders that contradicted themselves, his carefully constructed plan dissolving into desperate improvisation. Bravo element had moved to support Alpha, which left the perimeter exposed. Fighters were already circling to cut off their retreat. Overwatch to all elements, Soraya called. You have flanking movement to your north. 8 to 10 personnel moving to cut off extraction route. Ashworth's response was ragged, his breathing heavy. We see them. Bravo, redirect to intercept. Negative, Soraya cut in. If Bravo redirects, you lose rear security on Alpha. You need to consolidate and push west toward the secondary extraction point. I did not ask for your tactical assessment, Nazari. Ashworth's voice cracked with something that might have been fear. Stick to your lane. Soraya watched through her scope as Bravo element split, half moving to intercept the flanking force while the other half tried to maintain their original position. It was the worst possible decision, dividing their strength against a numerically superior enemy. The result was immediate and brutal. The flanking force hit Bravo's weakened line and pushed through, killing 2 operators in the first exchange. Now the team was scattered across the compound, taking fire from multiple directions, with no clear path to extraction. Through her scope, Soraya saw Yates dragging a wounded teammate toward cover. She saw Okonkwo rallying what remained of Alpha element behind a crumbling stone wall. She saw Vance go down, clutching his leg, his screams audible even over the gunfire. And she saw Ashworth frozen behind a pile of rubble, his weapon unfired, his eyes wide with the particular terror of a man watching his certainties collapse. The storm was fully upon them now, visibility dropping to near zero, the wind howling through the compound like a living thing. Air support was impossible. Extraction was impossible. Communication with command was intermittent at best. Overwatch to all elements, Soraya said, her voice steady despite the carnage below. Consolidated defensive position in the structure at Grid 471. Rally there. I will provide covering fire. For a moment, no one responded. Then Okonkwo's voice came through, strained but controlled. Copy, Overwatch. Alpha moving. Soraya began firing methodically, each shot buying seconds for the men below to move. She tracked targets through the snow, leading them precisely, compensating for wind and distance with the automatic precision of 20 years of practice. But even as she fired, she knew the math was against them. Her ammunition was finite. The enemy's numbers were not. And somewhere in that compound, Kareem Bashar was watching his trap close around the Americans who had come to kill him. The radio crackled one more time. A voice she did not recognize at first, thick with an accent that sent ice through her veins. I know you're out there, widow. The voice was almost gentle. I have been waiting for you. Come down from your mountain. Come see what I have prepared for the woman who watched her husband die. Soraya's finger tightened on the trigger, but she did not fire. Not yet. Bashar wanted her angry. He wanted her reckless. He wanted her to make a mistake. She would not give him the satisfaction. The team consolidated in the ruined structure Soraya had identified, dragging their wounded through snow that was now knee-deep in places. From her overwatch position, she counted heads as they moved. 9 operators made it inside. 3 did not. Chief Petty Officer Hendricks was dead, killed in the initial ambush. Petty Officer Castellano had taken a round through the throat and bled out before anyone could reach him. Vance was alive, but badly wounded, his femoral artery nicked by shrapnel, his survival measured in hours without proper medical care. Okonkwo's voice came through the radio, steady despite everything. Overwatch, we are consolidated. 3 wounded, 2 Kia. Ammunition at 40%. What is your status? Soraya checked her own supplies. 26 rounds remaining for the 13 Malawian Quatches. Her sidearm was fully loaded, but a pistol would not help at these distances. I am operational. Ammunition limited. What is the lieutenant commander's assessment? A pause. Too long. Then Okonkwo again, his voice careful. The lieutenant commander is evaluating options. Soraya understood what he was not saying. Ashworth had cracked. The man who had dismissed her concerns, who had pushed the timeline, who had led his team into a trap through sheer arrogance, was now sitting in that ruined building trying to remember how to breathe. She had seen it before. Some men were built for the planning room, but shattered when plans failed. Ashworth had never had an operation go this wrong because he had never been tested beyond his preparation. Now he was discovering the difference between confidence and capability. "Patch me through to him," she said. Another pause. "Stand by." The wind screamed across her position, driving snow into every gap in her clothing. Her fingers were going numb despite her gloves. At this altitude, in this weather, hypothermia was as dangerous as enemy fire. She had perhaps 4 hours before the cold started affecting her shooting. Maybe less. Nazari. Ashworth's voice was hollow, stripped of its former arrogance. "What do you want?" "I want a situation report from the actual commander of this operation. I want to know what your plan is for getting your men out of this." Silence. Then, almost too quiet to hear over the storm. "I do not have one." Soraya closed her eyes for a moment. She had expected this, but hearing it still sent a cold spike of anger through her chest. "Then listen carefully, Lieutenant Commander. I'm going to tell you what happens next, and you're going to execute it. Do you understand? I'm still in command of this operation. You are in command of nothing. Your men are dying because you refuse to listen. So now you're going to listen, or I'm going to walk off this mountain and leave you to explain to their families why you got them killed. Do you understand?" The silence stretched. When Ashworth spoke again, something had broken in his voice. "What do you need?" Soraya outlined her assessment. The team's current position was defensible but not sustainable. They had limited ammunition, wounded who needed evacuation, and no air support until the storm cleared. The enemy had superior numbers and knew the terrain. A direct breakout would be suicide, but there was another option. 1,800 meters to the northwest, there was a ridge position she had identified during her terrain analysis. It was higher than her current location, more exposed to the elements, but it offered commanding views of every approach to the team's position. From there, she could provide overwatch that would make any assault on the team catastrophically expensive for the attackers. The problem was getting there. The route crossed open ground that was almost certainly being watched. In daylight, she would be cut down before she covered half the distance. But the storm changed the calculation. Visibility was near zero. The enemy would be watching, but they would be watching blind. If she moved now, moved fast, she might reach the position before they realized she had abandoned her current overwatch. It was insane. It was also the only chance any of them had. "I am repositioning to the northwest ridge," she told Okonkwo. "It will take approximately 90 minutes in these conditions. During that time, you will have no overwatch. Keep your heads down and do not engage unless directly assaulted. Master Chief, that route is exposed. If they spot you, there's nothing we can do. If I stay here, we all die slowly instead of quickly. That is not an improvement." She began packing her gear, her movements efficient despite the cold. "Senior Chief, I need you to do something for me. Name it. Keep Yates alive. He is too young to die in a place like this." Okonkwo's response was quiet. "I will do my best, Master Chief." "You do the same." Soraya did not respond. Promises meant nothing in combat. Only actions mattered. She moved out into the storm, leaving the relative shelter of her position for the howling white darkness. The wind hit her like a physical force, staggering her sideways before she braced against it. Snow drove into her face, finding the gaps around her goggles, melting against her skin and refreezing. The first 100 meters were the worst. Open ground with no cover. Every step an act of faith that the enemy could not see her through the whiteout. She moved in a tactical crouch, her rifle slung across her back, her hands numb despite constant movement. Memories came unbidden. Darius, laughing at something she had said during their first deployment together. The way he looked at her when he thought she was not watching. The weight of his ring against her chest, bouncing with each step. She had promised herself she would not think about him during operations. Emotion was a liability. Distraction was death. But here, alone in the storm, fighting toward an impossible position to save men who had dismissed her, she could not help but wonder what he would say. Keep shooting, probably. That had been his answer to everything. When the world fell apart, when the plan dissolved, when hope seemed foolish, Darius had always said the same thing. Keep shooting until you cannot shoot anymore, and then find a way to shoot some more. She was halfway to the ridge when she heard the radio crackle. Overwatch, this is Bravo 2. Yates's voice, tight with controlled fear. We have movement on the eastern perimeter. Looks like they are probing our defenses. Soraya increased her pace, pushing through snow that grabbed at her legs with every step. Copy Bravo 2. Do not engage unless they commit to an assault. I am 40 minutes from position. 40 minutes. An eternity in combat. Anything could happen in 40 minutes. She pushed harder, her lungs burning, her muscles screaming, the storm trying to tear her off the mountain with every gust. Behind her, somewhere in the white darkness, the men of SEAL Team 3 were waiting for a woman most of them had dismissed to save their lives. She would not let them down, not because they deserved it, but because Darius would have saved them without hesitation, and she would not dishonor his memory by being less than he was. The ridge was waiting. So was Kareem Bashar. Only one of them was going to survive this night. The ridge was a knife edge of rock and ice, exposed to the full fury of the storm. Soraya crawled the last 20 meters on her belly, the wind threatening to rip her off the mountain with every gust. Her fingers had stopped feeling cold an hour ago. Now they simply felt like objects attached to her hands, distant and unreliable. She reached the position and began setting up. The snow had accumulated in drifts that provided natural concealment, but also blocked her sight lines. She carved out a firing position with numb hands, packing the snow into a stable rest for her rifle. Below, through breaks in the swirling white, she could see the structure where the team had consolidated. Muzzle flashes flickered in the darkness. The probing attack Yates had reported had escalated into something more sustained. Overwatch in position, she called into the radio. Engaging. Her first shot was instinct more than calculation. A fighter silhouetted against a burning vehicle, his weapon raised toward the team's position. She squeezed the trigger and watched him drop. The recoil was familiar, grounding, a physical anchor in the chaos. Overwatch, Bravo 2. Yates again, relief bleeding through his professional tone. Good to hear your voice, Master Chief. She was already acquiring her next target. Save the gratitude for after we survive this. The battle settled into a rhythm. Bashar's fighters would advance, using the storm for cover. Soraya would identify them through her scope, reading movement in the snow, tracking the subtle disturbances that betrayed human presence. She would fire, they would fall, and the advance would stall. But she was burning through ammunition. Each shot was irreplaceable. Each miss was unthinkable. 17 rounds, then 12, then 8. The radio crackled with a voice she had hoped never to hear again. You are still alive, widow. Bashar sounded almost impressed. I thought the mountain would kill you before I had the chance. Soraya did not respond. She was tracking movement near the compound's eastern wall, where a group of fighters was massing for another push. I want you to know something, Bashar continued. Your husband died well. He did not beg. He did not cry. He simply looked at me and said that you would come for me. He said you would find me no matter how long it took. Her finger tightened on the trigger. Through the scope, she could see the fighters beginning their advance. I laughed at him, Bashar said. I told him that women do not seek vengeance. They weep and move on. But here you are, 4 years later, freezing on a mountain to kill me. Perhaps he knew you better than I gave him credit for. Soraya fired. One of the advancing fighters crumpled. The others scattered, seeking cover. 7 rounds. I'm going to tell you something now, widow. A gift from one killer to another. Bashar's voice dropped, becoming almost intimate. The man who betrayed your husband's position. The man who told me where to find your Overwatch team in Yemen. He is in that building with you right now. Soraya's blood turned to ice. She stopped breathing. Did you think it was chance that we found you that day? That we happened to flank your position at exactly the right moment? No. We had help. American help. Someone who wanted your husband dead badly enough to sell him to me. She forced herself to exhale. To think. Bashar was trying to destabilize her, to make her doubt her allies at the worst possible moment. It was a classic interrogation technique, sowing division and paranoia. But something in his voice rang true. Something that connected to questions she had never been able to answer about that day in Yemen. The intelligence failure that put them in that valley. The communication breakdown that isolated their position. The impossibly precise flanking maneuver that caught them exposed. She had always assumed it was bad luck. The fog of war. Now she wondered if it had been something else entirely. "I see I have your attention," Bashar said. "Good. Think about it, widow. Think about who benefits from your husband's death. Think about who was there that day and walked away without a scratch." Saraya's mind raced through the personnel roster from Yemen. Her team had been small. 6 operators plus herself and Darius. Farhad died in the ambush. One had been wounded so badly he never returned to service. That left one man who had emerged from that nightmare unscathed. Senior Chief Elias Okonkwo. No, the thought was immediate and violent. Okonkwo had been her student, her friend. He had mourned Darius alongside her, had held her hand at the memorial service, had checked on her in the months after when she could barely function. He could not have betrayed them. He could not have. But Bashar's words burrowed into her like shrapnel, tearing at certainties she had never thought to question. The radio crackled again. "Overwatch, this is Bravo Actual." Okonkwo's voice, calm and steady. "We are taking heavy fire on the western approach. Can you redirect?" Saraya stared through her scope at the western side of the structure. She could see the muzzle flashes, the fighters advancing through the snow. She could also see Okonkwo's position, exposed as he directed the defense. One shot, that was all it would take. If Bashar was telling the truth, if Okonkwo had sold out her husband, she could end him right now, and no one would ever know it was not enemy fire. Her crosshairs drifted toward his position. Her finger rested on the trigger. Darius's voice echoed in her memory. Not a real voice, not a ghost, just the impression of him that she carried everywhere. He was laughing at something, the way he always laughed, full and unguarded. She remembered what he had told her once, late at night, when they were talking about the things that kept them awake. "The day I stopped trusting my people is the day I stopped being fit to lead them. Doubt is a poison, Saraya. It will kill you faster than any bullet." She moved her crosshairs away from Okonkwo and onto the advancing fighters. "Engaging western approach," she said and fired. 6 rounds. Then 5. Then 4. Bashar was still talking, but she had stopped listening. Whatever the truth was about Yemen, she would find it later. Right now, there were men counting on her, men she had chosen to trust, and she would not betray that choice based on the word of a murderer. The fighters fell back. The western approach held. 3 rounds remaining. The storm was beginning to weaken, the wind dying from a scream to a moan. Dawn was perhaps 2 hours away. If they could survive until then, air support might reach them. If Saraya settled behind her rifle and waited for the next wave. Somewhere in the compound below, Kareem Bashar was preparing his final assault. She intended to be ready for him. 3 rounds. Saraya had killed men with less, but never against these odds. The storm was fading, which meant visibility was improving for both sides. Soon Bashar's fighters would be able to see her position. Soon the advantage of concealment would disappear entirely. She needed to move. She needed to find a position closer to the team, somewhere she could make those 3 rounds count. But moving meant exposing herself, and exposure meant death. The radio had gone quiet. Bashar had stopped his taunting, which worried her more than his words had. Silence from an enemy meant they were acting instead of talking. "Overwatch to Bravo Actual," she called. "Status report." Okonkwo's voice came back tired but intact. "Holding position. Vance is stabilized, but needs evacuation within 2 hours or we lose him. Ammunition critical across all elements. The lieutenant commander is..." Okonkwo paused. "He is functional." Saraya understood. Ashworth was present but useless, a body taking up space while better men fought around him. She had seen it before. Some officers recovered from their first taste of real chaos. Others never did. "What is your count on enemy forces?" she asked. "Best estimate, 40 to 50 remaining. They have pulled back to the compound perimeter. Looks like they are regrouping for a major push. 40 to 50 against 9 Americans, 3 of them wounded, with maybe 2 magazines of ammunition between them. The math was impossible, but impossible was just another word for not yet accomplished. "Senior Chief," she said, "I'm coming down." "Negative, Master Chief. You're more valuable in Overwatch. Your rifle is the only thing keeping them from rushing us. My rifle has 3 rounds in it. After that, I am just a spectator." She was already moving, packing her gear with hands that had regained some feeling as the wind died. "I could do more good at close range with my sidearm than sitting up here empty." The descent was treacherous. Ice had formed over the rocks during the storm, turning every handhold into a potential fall. Soraya moved carefully but quickly, aware that dawn was approaching and with it the end of their concealment. Halfway down, she paused in a crevice to catch her breath. Her body was running on reserves that had been empty hours ago. The cold had sapped her strength, and the altitude made every movement cost twice what it should. She closed her eyes and let herself think about Darius. Not the way he died. She had spent 4 years trying not to think about that. Instead, she thought about the way he lived. The morning he proposed to her, standing in the rain outside the base chapel, because he could not wait another minute. The night he stayed up with her for 12 hours while she practiced a shot she could not seem a master, never once suggesting she give up. The last time he told her he loved her, casually, over breakfast, as if they had forever. "We never had forever," she whispered to the wind. "We just had borrowed time." But borrowed time was still time, and she intended to spend what remained of hers making sure his death meant something. She keyed her radio. "Darius, if you can hear me wherever you are, I could use one of your famous pep talks right about now." Static. Then, unexpectedly, Yates's voice. "Master Chief, did you say something?" Soraya almost laughed. "Negative, Bravo 2. Talking to myself. Old habit. Copy that." There was a pause. "Master Chief, can I ask you something?" She resumed her descent, finding footholds by feel in the darkness. "You seem to have a lot of questions, petty officer. My instructors always said that was a weakness. Questions mean doubt. Doubt means hesitation. Hesitation means death. That is what they told us. Your instructors were wrong." Soraya dropped the last few meters to a rocky shelf, her boots crunching in the snow. Questions mean thinking. Thinking means adapting. The operators who never question anything are the ones who die when the plan falls apart. She scanned the terrain below, plotting her route to the team's position. "What is your question?" Another pause. Longer this time. "How do you keep going? After everything you have lost, how do you still do this?" Soraya considered the question as she moved. It was the same question she had asked herself 1,000 times in the years since Yemen. The answer had changed over time, evolving as she did. "When my husband died," she said, "I wanted to die too. I spent 6 months hoping a training accident would take me out, hoping I would catch a round during a live fire exercise, hoping I would just stop waking up." She found a stable position behind a boulder and paused to check her weapon. But dying would have been easy. Living was the hard part. Living meant carrying his memory forward. Living meant becoming the person he believed I could be. "So you keep going for him." "I keep going because of him. There's a difference." She started moving again, the team's position now visible through the thinning snow. "He showed me what I was capable of. He made me believe I was more than what the world told me I could be. I owe it to him to prove that belief was not misplaced." The building was 50 meters away now. She could see the defensive positions the team had established, the wounded huddled against the far wall, the operators watching the perimeter with exhausted vigilance. Okonkwo met her at the entrance, his face drawn but his eyes sharp. "Master Chief, welcome to our humble fortress." She handed him her rifle. 3 rounds. "Make them count." He took the weapon with something like reverence. "I will." Inside, the situation was worse than she had expected. Vance was unconscious, his leg wrapped in blood-soaked bandages, his skin the color of old paper. 2 other operators had wounds that needed attention. The rest were battered and exhausted, running on fumes and determination. Ashworth sat in the corner, his weapon across his knees, his eyes fixed on nothing. He did not acknowledge her arrival. Soraya moved through the space, checking on each man, offering quiet words of encouragement. They looked at her differently now, not with the skepticism or dismissal she had faced before the operation, with something closer to hope. She found Yates at the eastern window, watching the compound through a crack in the stonework. He was young, she realized, so impossibly young, the same age Darius had been when they first met. "Thank you," he said without looking at her, "for answering my question. Thank me by surviving this." She checked her sidearm, 15 rounds in the magazine, 1 in the chamber. "That is an order, Petty Officer." He almost smiled. "Copy that, Master Chief." The first light of dawn was touching the peaks to the east when the radio crackled one final time. "Widow." Bashar's voice was calm, almost peaceful. "The storm has passed. My men are ready. This is your last chance. Surrender yourself, and I will let the others live. Refuse, and I will kill them all and make you watch before I take my time with you." Soraya keyed her radio. She thought about Darius. She thought about the men around her. She thought about 4 years of grief transformed into purpose. "Come and get me," she said. Then she chambered around and waited for the dawn. The assault came with the sunrise. Bashar had learned from his earlier probes. Instead of scattered advances, he sent his fighters in 3 coordinated waves, each one designed to fix the defenders in place while the others maneuvered. It was textbook insurgent tactics executed with unusual discipline. Soraya had positioned herself at the northern window, the most exposed approach and the one most likely to be hit first. She had 16 rounds in her pistol and no illusions about what those odds meant. The first wave broke against their defenses like water against rock. Okonkwo used 2 of the precious rifle rounds to drop the lead fighters, and the rest scattered for cover. But they did not retreat. They held their positions and kept the team pinned while the second wave advanced from the east. Yates was firing controlled bursts from his position, his earlier nervousness replaced by the focused calm of a man who had accepted his situation. Beside him, Petty Officer Resnick was down to his last magazine, making every round count. The second wave reached the outer wall of their position. Soraya heard them stacking up on the other side, preparing to breach. She moved to intercept, her pistol raised, her breathing steady. The door exploded inward. 2 fighters came through in quick succession, their weapons sweeping the room. Soraya fired twice, both shots finding center mass, and they dropped before they could acquire targets. A third tried to follow and caught a round from Okonkwo's rifle. 1 round left in the 13 Malawian Quatches. 13 in her pistol. They kept coming. Soraya lost count of the fighters she dropped, her pistol barking in the confined space, brass casings bouncing off the stone walls. Her training took over completely, each movement automatic, each shot placed with mechanical precision. A fighter got close enough to grab her weapon arm. She let him pull her forward, using his momentum against him, driving her elbow into his throat and following with a knee to his groin. He folded, and she put a round through his skull before he hit the ground. 8 rounds. The third wave hit while they were still dealing with the second. Soraya heard Resnick scream as a bullet found his shoulder, spinning him away from his position. Yates moved to cover him, exposing himself to fire from the eastern window. Soraya saw the muzzle flash before she heard the shot. She was moving before she consciously decided to, throwing herself into Yates and knocking him sideways as the round passed through the space where his head had been. They hit the ground together, tangled and breathless. Yates stared at her with wide eyes. "You just saved my life. Return the favor later." She pushed herself up and resumed firing. 6 rounds, then 4, then 2. The assault was faltering. The bodies piling up in the doorway and beneath the windows had created natural barriers, and Bashar's fighters were losing their appetite for charging into certain death. The gunfire became sporadic, then stopped entirely. In the sudden silence, Soraya could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. She ejected her magazine. 2 rounds. Her backup magazine held another 15. Not enough for another sustained assault, but enough to matter. Overwatch to any station. Okonkwo was on the radio, his voice hoarse. "Any station. This is SEAL Team 3, requesting immediate air support at grid reference 471. We are combat ineffective and require emergency extraction. Static. Then, miraculously, a response. SEAL Team 3, this is Reaper 1-6. We have your position. Flight of 2 Apaches inbound. ETA, 15 minutes. Mark your location and stand by. 15 minutes. An eternity in combat, but also a lifetime more than they had dared to hope for. Soraya allowed herself a single breath of relief before Bashar's voice crackled over the captured radio. 15 minutes, widow. That is how long you have to live. Because I'm coming for you myself. She moved to the window and looked out at the compound. Through the morning light, she could see movement near the central building. Fighters gathering, vehicles being positioned, and there, standing in the open with absolute contempt for the danger, a tall figure in black. Karim Bashar. He was too far for a pistol shot, too far for anything except the rifle, and the rifle had only 1 round left. 1 round, 1 chance. 2,400 meters in variable wind with a scope that had been battered by a night in the storm. She turned to Okonkwo. Give me the rifle. He looked at her, then at the distant figure, then back at her. That is an impossible shot. I know. He handed her the weapon without another word. Soraya moved to the window and settled into position. The stock was cold against her cheek, the familiar weight both comforting and terrifying. Through the scope, she found Bashar. He was addressing his fighters, gesturing toward the American position, probably promising them glory and martyrdom. She began her calculations. Distance, 2,400 meters. Wind from a northwest at approximately 15 knots, gusting to 20. Temperature near freezing, which would affect the round's trajectory. Altitude, which changed everything. It was the longest shot she had ever attempted. Longer than the unofficial record she had set 5 years ago. Longer than anything she had ever practiced. Darius's voice whispered in her memory. Wind reading, distance calculation, breathe, squeeze. She adjusted her aim, compensating for each variable, feeling her way toward the solution through instinct and experience. Her finger found the trigger. Her breathing slowed. Bashar turned toward her position. Even at this distance, she could swear he was looking directly at her, challenging her, dared her to try. For Darius, she whispered. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked against her shoulder. The round left the barrel at 2,800 feet per second, beginning its long arc across the valley. Time seemed to stretch as she watched through the scope. Her heart stopped, her lungs frozen. 2.4 seconds. That was how long the bullet would take to reach its target. 1 second. The round was climbing, reaching the apex of its trajectory. 2 seconds. It was falling now, dropping toward the compound, the wind pushing it sideways. 2.4 seconds. Karim Bashar's head snapped back. His body crumpled. The fighters around him scattered in panic, searching for a threat they could not see. Soraya exhaled. It was done. For years of grief, for years of hunting, for years of waiting. Ended with a single round across an impossible distance. She lowered the rifle and let herself feel the weight of the moment. Not triumph, not satisfaction, just completion. A promise kept. Behind her, Yates was staring at her with an expression she could not read. Master Chief, he said slowly. What the hell was that? Soraya looked at the empty rifle in her hands. That was goodbye, she said. The sound of helicopter rotors began to build in the distance. The Apaches came in low and fast, their rotors tearing the morning air apart. Soraya watched through the shattered window as they made their first gun run, 30mm cannons chewing through the compound where Bashar's fighters had been regrouping. The insurgents who had been so eager to die for their commander moments ago now scattered like roaches in sudden light. Extraction inbound, Okonkwo announced. Blackhawk 2 minutes out. Get the wounded ready to move. The team transformed into controlled chaos. Operators who had been fighting for their lives moments ago now became medics and stretcher bearers, preparing Vance and the other wounded for transport. Even Ashworth stirred from his corner, helping to lift Resnick despite the distant look that had not left his eyes. Soraya remained at the window, watching the compound burn. Bashar's body lay where it had fallen, surrounded by fighters too terrified to approach. She felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not relief, not the closure she had spent 4 years imagining. Just emptiness where the hate had been. Master Chief. Yates appeared at her shoulder. We need to move. She nodded, but did not turn away from the window. Go ahead. I will be right behind you. He hesitated. Are you okay? The question was so absurd that she almost laughed. No, petty officer. I have not been okay for 4 years. But I am functional. That will have to be enough. The Black Hawk touched down in a swirl of dust and snow, its crew chief already waving them forward. Soraya helped carry Vance to the helicopter, his blood warm against her hands despite the cold. He was still breathing, but barely. The medic on board took one look at his leg and started working with the grim efficiency of someone who knew exactly how close to death his patient was. They lifted off as the Apaches made another pass, the compound shrinking beneath them until it was just a smear of smoke and fire against the White Mountains. Soraya watched it disappear and tried to feel something. Anything. Darius was still dead. Killing Bashar had not changed that. Nothing would ever change that. But maybe now she could stop living in that moment. Maybe now she could start living in the present instead of being trapped forever in a Yemen valley with her husband's blood on her hands. The flight to Bagram took 40 minutes. Soraya spent most of it staring at her hands, which had finally stopped shaking. Around her, the surviving members of SEAL Team 3 sat in exhausted silence. Nobody spoke. There was nothing to say. Okonkwo settled into the seat beside her, his bulk a familiar comfort. That shot, he said quietly. I have never seen anything like it. Neither have I. She meant it. The calculations she had made, the adjustments, the sheer improbability of the round finding its target. It should have been impossible. Part of her still was not sure it had actually happened. He was silent for a moment. Bashar said something on a radio. Before the final assault. Something about Yemen. Soraya tensed. She had hoped no one else had heard that transmission. What about it? He said there was a traitor. Someone who sold out your team. Okonkwo's voice was careful, neutral. He said that person was with us. Soraya turned to look at him. His face was unreadable, but his eyes held something she had not expected. Pain. The pain of a man who knew he was under suspicion and could do nothing to defend himself. You think he meant me, Okonkwo said. It was not a question. The thought crossed my mind. He nodded slowly. It would cross mine too, in your position. I'm the only survivor from that day besides you. The logic is obvious. He met her gaze directly. But I need you to know something, Master Chief. Darius was my friend. He was my mentor. Everything I am as an operator, I learned from him and from you. I would have died for him without hesitation. Soraya studied his face, searching for deception. She found nothing but grief and sincerity. That did not prove anything. The best liars were the ones who believe their own lies. But she had made a choice on that mountain, when her crosshairs had drifted toward him and she had pulled them away. She had chosen to trust. And trust, once given, could not be half-hearted. I believe you, she said. Some of the tension left his shoulders. Thank you. But someone betrayed us that day. Someone told Bashar where we would be. Soraya looked back at her hands. I intend to find out who. The helicopter was beginning its descent when Ashworth finally spoke. His voice was rusty, as if the words had to fight their way past something stuck in his throat. Master Chief Nazari. Soraya looked at him. He was staring at the floor, unable to meet her eyes. I was wrong, he said. About you. About everything. I let my prejudice blind me to what you were capable of. I made decisions based on ego instead of evidence. And men died because of it. The admission hung in the air. Around them, the other operators pretended not to listen, but Soraya could feel their attention. She could have destroyed him. A few words about his frozen panic, his contradictory orders, his complete collapse under pressure. It would end his career and probably send him into a spiral he might never escape. Instead, she said nothing for a long moment. Then she leaned forward. Men died because we walked into a trap, Lieutenant Commander. The intelligence was compromised. The enemy knew we were coming. That is not entirely on you. She paused. But you ignored every warning I gave you. You dismissed my tactical concerns because they came from a woman. You put your ego above the lives of your operators. Ashworth flinched as if she had struck him. If you want my forgiveness, you will not get it. Not today. Maybe not ever. Soraya sat back. But if you want to make this right, then learn from it. Become the leader your men deserve, instead of the leader your father's failures convinced you that you had to be. He looked up at her, something broken behind his eyes. How do you know about my father? Because men like you are not born. You are made. By fathers who failed and blamed others for it. By families that taught you to see threat instead of talent. By a system that rewarded your mediocrity because you looked the part. She held his gaze. You have a choice now, Ashworth. You can let this destroy you, or you can let it rebuild you. That is not my decision to make. The helicopter touched down at Bagram. Medical teams rushed forward to receive the wounded. Soraya stepped off onto the tarmac and felt the solid ground beneath her feet. Behind her, Ashworth remained seated for a long moment. When he finally stood, something in his posture had changed. Not redemption. That would take years if it came at all, but perhaps the first step toward it. Soraya did not look back. She had her own healing to do. And somewhere in the files and records and classified reports, there was a traitor waiting to be found. The debrief at Bagram lasted 6 hours. Soraya sat in a windowless room and recounted every detail of the operation, from the insertion to the impossible shot that ended Karim Bashar. Intelligence officers recorded her words with the detached professionalism of people who had never fired a weapon in anger. When it was over, Commander Hollister was waiting for her in the corridor. "Walk with me," Hollister said. They moved through the base in silence, past hangars and barracks, and the constant hum of military machinery. Hollister led her to a quiet corner of the airfield, where they could speak without being overheard. The official report will credit the entire team with the successful elimination of Bashar, Hollister said. Your specific contribution will be classified at the highest level. Soraya had expected as much. The military did not like stories about women making impossible shots to save SEAL teams. It complicated the narrative. I did not do it for credit. I know. That is why I wanted to talk to you privately. Hollister turned to face her. You asked me once if I knew about the connection between Bashar and your husband. The answer is yes. I knew. Soraya felt the old anger stir, but it was distant now. Muted. Why did you not tell me? Because I needed you focused on the mission, not on revenge. Hollister's expression was unreadable, and because I was not certain you would go if you knew the full truth. The full truth. Soraya tasted the words. What does that mean? It means that Bashar was not wrong. There was a traitor in Yemen. Someone fed him intelligence about your position, your team composition, your extraction timeline. Hollister paused. We have known this for 3 years. We have been trying to identify the source ever since. The world tilted slightly. 3 years. They had known for 3 years that her husband's death was not just enemy action, but active betrayal, and no one had told her. Who, she asked. Her voice was steady despite the earthquake inside her. We do not know. The intelligence trail went cold 18 months ago. Whoever was covered their tracks expertly. Hollister met her eyes. But we have new information now. Bashar kept records. Detailed records of every transaction, every payment, every communication with his sources. Those records are being analyzed as we speak. Soraya absorbed this. The man she had killed had been meticulous in his evil. Somewhere in his files was the name of the person who had sold her husband to his executioner. When you find out, she said, I want to know. You will be the first person I call. Hollister placed a hand on her shoulder, a rare gesture of human contact from a woman who maintained professional distance like a shield. What you did out there, Soraya. The shot, yes, but more than that. You held that team together when their commander fell apart. You made decisions that saved lives. You were everything I knew you could be. I was just doing my job. No, you were doing the job no one believed you could do. There's a difference. They stood in silence for a moment, watching a C-17 lumber down the runway and lift into the gray sky. What happens to Ashworth? Soraya asked. Hollister's expression hardened. That is above my pay grade. But between us, I do not think he will command another combat operation. The men who survived will talk, regardless of what the official report says. His reputation is finished. Soraya thought about the broken man she had confronted on the helicopter. Part of her felt satisfaction at his downfall. Another part felt something closer to pity. He had been built wrong from the foundation up, shaped by a father's bitterness into a weapon that cut the wrong people. He could still be useful, she said. Training. Logistics. Something that does not put lives at risk. That is generous of you. Hollister sounded surprised. After everything he did, he is not the enemy. He is just a man who was never taught how to be wrong. Soraya shook her head. I have spent 4 years hating. I am tired of it. The medical facility was quiet when she arrived to check on the wounded. Vance had survived surgery and was expected to make a full recovery, though his leg would never be the same. Resnick was already complaining about the food, which meant he was healing well. The others were stable, resting, waiting for transport home. Yates found her in the corridor outside Vance's room. Master Chief. He looked different than he had on the mountain. Older, somehow. Changed in ways that would take years to fully understand. I wanted to thank you. I told you to save the gratitude for after we survived. We survived. He shook his head. Not just for that. For what you said. About keeping going. About living because of someone instead of just for them. He swallowed hard. I have been thinking about that a lot. Soraya studied his face. The idealism she had seen at the start of the mission was still there, but tempered now by experience. He had seen the worst of combat and had not broken. That meant something. You did well out there, she said. When everything fell apart, you kept fighting. You protected your teammates. You followed orders even when those orders came from someone you had just met. I followed orders because they were the right orders. The rank on your collar did not matter. What mattered was that you knew what you were doing. She allowed herself a small smile. That might be the nicest thing anyone has said to me in years. I mean it. Yates hesitated, then continued. The guys are talking. About what happened on that mountain. About the shot. They're saying it was the greatest thing they have ever seen. The greatest thing they have ever seen. Soraya thought about the cold, the wind, the impossible distance. The way time had stretched as she waited for the round to find its target. The emptiness she had felt when Bashar fell. It was just a shot, she said. The rifle did the work. I just pointed it in the right direction. Yates looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. If you say so, Master Chief. He walked away, leaving her alone in the corridor with the hum of medical equipment and the distant sounds of a base that never slept. Soraya leaned against the wall and closed her eyes. She was exhausted in ways that sleep could not fix. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness that went beyond physical. But beneath the exhaustion, something else was stirring. Something she had not felt in 4 years. Hope. Not hope that things would be easy. Not hope that the pain would disappear. But hope that she might finally be able to carry it without being crushed. Darius, she whispered to the empty corridor. I think I'm going to be okay. Somewhere, she was certain, he was smiling. Arlington National Cemetery was quiet in the early morning light. Soraya walked the familiar path between rows of white headstones, her footsteps soft against the damp grass. She had made this journey dozens of times over the past 4 years, but today felt different. Today she was not coming to grieve. She was coming to say goodbye. Darius's grave was in Section 60, among the other fallen from the wars that had defined their generation. The headstone was simple, white marble with his name and rank and the dates that bookend a life cut short. Beloved husband, faithful servant, forever honored. She knelt beside the stone and placed her hand against the cold marble. Hey, she said softly. I'm back. The wind stirred the trees overhead, scattering a few early autumn leaves across the grass. Soraya watched them fall and remembered the last time she had stood here 3 months ago before the mission. She had promised him then that she would find Bashar, that she would make him pay. I did it, she said. He is dead. I put a round through his skull from 2,400 meters in a blizzard. She paused. You would have called me crazy for even attempting that shot. You always said I took too many risks. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of memories, full of the man she had loved and lost, and carried with her every day since. I thought killing him would fix something, she continued. I thought it would fill the hole you left. But it did not. Nothing can fill that hole, Darius. Nothing ever will. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. But I think I understand now that the hole is not supposed to be filled. It is supposed to be there. It is the space where you lived, and it will always be yours. She reached in her pocket and pulled out one of his dog tags. She had worn both of them since Yemen, his and hers together, a constant weight against her heart. Now she pressed his tag into the soft earth at the base of the headstone. "I've been holding on to you so tightly," she said, "afraid that if I let go, I would lose you completely. But you are not in this tag. You are not in this grave. You are in everything I do, every shot I take, every life I save, every person I teach. You are in the way I breathe, and the way I fight, and the way I love this work we shared." She stood slowly, her knees aching from the cold ground. The sun was breaking through the clouds now, casting long shadows across the cemetery. "I'm going to live now, Darius. Really live, not just survive. I'm going to teach and mentor and maybe even laugh again someday. And I'm going to do it knowing that you are with me. Not as a ghost, not as a burden, as the best part of who I am." She touched the headstone one last time, her fingers tracing the letters of his name. "I love you. I will always love you. But I'm not going to die with you anymore." She smiled through her tears. "Save me a spot up there, okay? But do not expect me anytime soon. I have work to do." The flight back to San Diego took 5 hours. Soraya spent most of it staring out the window at the clouds below, thinking about what came next. Hollister had offered her a choice. She could return to the training command at Coronado, resume her position as an instructor, and pretend the last week had never happened. Or she could take a new role, one that Hollister had been developing for months, waiting for the right person to fill it. Special Advisor to Naval Special Warfare Group 1. Direct access to operational planning. Authority to identify and address tactical deficiencies before they became fatal. A position created specifically for someone with her experience and perspective. It would mean more deployments, more risk, more time away from the relative safety of the training range. But it would also mean making a difference at a level she had never been able to reach before. She had not given Hollister an answer yet. She needed time to think, time to figure out what she wanted her life to look like now that revenge was no longer its organizing principle. Coronado was warm and bright when she arrived, a sharp contrast to the frozen mountains she had left behind. She took a taxi to the training center, not ready to face her empty apartment and the memories it contained. The range was active when she got there, a new class of candidates running through their qualifications. She stood at the edge of the facility and watched them work, remembering her own time as a trainee decades ago. So young, so certain that skill and determination would be enough. Master Chief Nazari. She turned to find Senior Chief Harlan approaching, his weathered face creased with something that might have been respect. "Senior Chief, I was not expecting a welcoming committee. Word travels fast." He stopped beside her, watching the candidates alongside her. "They're saying you made a shot that should not have been possible. They're saying you saved an entire team. They're saying a lot of things." Soraya shrugged. "Most of them are exaggerated." Harlan was quiet for a moment. "I owe you an apology," he said finally. "When you first came to this command, I thought you were a publicity stunt, a token to satisfy the politicians. I did not believe you belonged here. I know. I was wrong." He turned to face her directly. "What you did for Reyes, what you have done for every candidate who came through here thinking they were not good enough. That matters. It matters more than any shot, no matter how impossible." Soraya looked at him, this man who had dismissed her for years, and saw something she had not expected. Genuine remorse. Genuine growth. "Thank you, Senior Chief. That means more than you know." Movement on the range caught her attention. A familiar figure was running the candidates through their paces, calling out corrections with a confidence that had not been there a month ago. Lucia Reyes, no longer a struggling candidate, but a qualified operator, now serving as an assistant instructor while she awaited her first team assignment. Soraya watched her work and felt something warm spread through her chest. This was why she did it. Not for the shots, or the missions, or the recognition that never came. For the Lucias of the world. For every person who had been told they did not belong and needed someone to show them otherwise. Reyes looked up and saw her. Even from across the range, Soraya could see the smile that broke across her face. She smiled back. This, she realized, was what healing looked like. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of purpose. Not forgetting what was lost, but honoring it through what remained. She had work to do, and for the first time in 4 years, she was ready to do it. 3 weeks later, Soraya stood on the same rifle range where her story with Lucia Reyes had begun. The morning sun cast long shadows across the packed earth, and a familiar smell of gunpowder and ocean salt filled the air. A new class of candidates was gathering for their first day of precision rifle training, their faces a mixture of determination and barely concealed terror. Among them, near the back of the formation, a young woman stood apart from the others. Seaman apprentice Priya Sharma had dark eyes that held something Soraya recognized. The look of someone who had been told her entire life that she was reaching too high, dreaming too big, wanting too much. Soraya had read her file the night before. Sharma had grown up in a small town in Texas, the daughter of immigrants who had sacrificed everything to give her opportunities they never had. She had enlisted against her family's wishes, convinced that service was her calling. Her scores were exceptional. Her physical performance was outstanding. And yet, every evaluation noted the same thing. Lacks confidence. Hesitates under pressure. May not be suited for special operations. The same words had been written about Soraya 30 years ago. The same doubts had followed her through every stage of her career, whispered by men who could not imagine a woman belonging in their world. She stepped forward to address the class. Good morning. I am Master Chief Petty Officer Soraya Nazari. For the next 8 weeks, I will be teaching you how to shoot, not how to pull a trigger. Any fool can do that. How to shoot, how to put a round exactly where it needs to be, when it needs to be there, under conditions that would make most people forget their own names. She paused, letting her gaze move across the assembled candidates. Some of them met her eyes. Others looked away. Sharma held her gaze longest. Some of you have heard stories about me. Some of those stories are true. Most are exaggerated. What matters is not what I have done. What matters is what you will do. Every one of you has the potential to be exceptional. My job is to help you find that potential and turn it into capability. The training began. Soraya moved through the candidates, observing their form, their breathing, their trigger discipline. Most of them made the same mistakes every new shooter made. Gripping too hard, anticipating recoil, holding their breath instead of controlling it. Sharma was different. Her form was nearly perfect, her technique textbook. But when it came time to fire, she hesitated. The crosshairs would settle on the target, her finger would find the trigger, and then she would freeze. Second-guessing, doubting, afraid to commit. Soraya watched her miss 3 shots in a row, each one pulled slightly by the flinch she could not control. The other instructors were already shaking their heads, writing her off the same way they had written off Reyes. Seaman Apprentice Sharma. Soraya's voice carried across the range. With me. Sharma followed her to a quiet corner of the facility, her face tight with the expectation of criticism. Soraya studied her for a long moment before speaking. Tell me what happens when you are about to fire. Sharma swallowed. I line up the shot. I control my breathing. I start to squeeze the trigger. And then I think about what happens if I miss. What happens if you miss? I fail. I wash out. I prove everyone right who said I did not belong here. Sharma's voice cracked slightly. My father told me I was being foolish. My mother cried when I enlisted. My brothers said I would be home within a year. Every time I'm about to take a shot, I hear their voices telling me I am not good enough. Soraya nodded slowly. She knew those voices. She had carried them herself for decades, quieting them only through relentless proof of her own capability. Do you want to know a secret? She said. Every shooter hears those voices. Every single one. The difference between the ones who make it and the ones who do not is not talent. It is not physical ability. It is the willingness to pull the trigger anyway. Sharma looked at her with something like desperation. How do I do that? You decide that the voices are wrong. Now might be wrong. Are wrong. You decide that you belong here, that you have earned your place, that no one else's doubt has the power to define your future. Soraya stepped closer. And then you take the shot. Not because you are certain you will hit the target, but because you refuse to let fear make your decisions for you. What if I miss? Then you adjust and fire again. Missing is not failure. Quitting is failure. Letting the voices win is failure. She placed a hand on Sharma's shoulder. I have missed more shots than you will ever take. Every one of them taught me something. Every one of them made the next shot possible. They returned to the range. Sharma settled behind her rifle, her breathing controlled, her form steady. Soraya knelt beside her, close enough to speak without being overheard. The target is 800 meters. Wind from the west at 5 knots. You have done this 1,000 times in training. The only difference now is that it counts. She paused. Take the shot, Seaman Apprentice. Show me who you really are. Sharma exhaled slowly. Her finger tightened on the trigger. For a moment, Soraya could see the old hesitation flickering behind her eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by something harder, something certain. The rifle cracked. Downrange, the spotter called a hit. Center mass. Sharma exhaled sharply, her hands trembling with released tension. She looked at Soraya with an expression of pure disbelief. Again, Soraya said. Sharma fired. Another hit, then another. By the 5th round, the trembling had stopped entirely. Soraya stood and looked down at her. Same time tomorrow, Seaman Apprentice. We have a lot of work to do. She walked away before Sharma could respond, but she allowed herself a small smile as she went. The cycle was continuing. The legacy was being passed on. Everything Darius had given her, everything she had learned through pain and loss and determination, was now flowing forward into a new generation. If you have stayed with this story until the end, drop a comment and let us know what moved you most. Maybe it was Soraya's journey, or maybe you know someone like her who found strength when everyone counted them out. We would love to hear your story too. That evening, Soraya sat on the beach near the training center, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. The ocean was calm, the waves gentle against the sand. She held Darius's remaining dog tag in her hand, running her thumb across the embossed letters of his name. Her phone buzzed. A message from Hollister. The analysis of Bashar's records was complete. They had identified the traitor, an American contractor who had been selling intelligence to multiple insurgent groups for years. He had been arrested that morning in Virginia, his decades of betrayal finally catching up with him. It was not Okonkwo. It had never been Okonkwo. The doubt Bashar had planted had been just another weapon, designed to destroy from within what he could not defeat from without. Soraya read the message twice, then put her phone away. Justice had been served. The last thread of Yemen had been tied off. There was nothing left to hunt, nothing left to avenge. Only life, stretching out before her like the ocean, vast and uncertain and full of possibility. She pressed the dog tag to her lips, then slipped it back beneath her shirt, where it would rest against her heart for as long as she lived. The storm had passed. Tempest remained. And tomorrow, there would be another young woman on that range, struggling against voices that told her she was not enough. Soraya would be there to prove those voices wrong, just as Darius had done for her all those years ago.